Hi, it's Holly with Hollyberry Designs, and today I'm going to create a hot mess on a wooden plaque, a little bit different than canvas. I'm going to do this as a background to a stencil that I'm going to turn into a picture in my kitchen. So we're going to start with painting it black for the background of it. So now we've got our board painted, it's dried, and we're going to go ahead and get the hot mess going. So you're going to see it's pretty easy. I'm just painting L's just across the board. I'm going up diagonally across the board. And I'm going to do this. I'm just going to diagonally paint the L's across the entire board pretty much until I've filled in most of the board with the L's. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It doesn't have to be pretty. Obviously, this isn't. It's called a hot mess for a reason. It is just that. It's a hot mess. When it's done, though, it looks kind of cool. So we're just going to keep filling this in. And we're going to do this with all of our colors. So for this project, I've chosen to use a yellow. I'm going to use a peach next, then a red, and then just to give it a little pop of color, I'm going to use a turquoise at the end. When we're done, you're not going to really see any of the black. It'll be almost completely covered, but you do want to have a base on your board because you want to make sure that you don't just have plain board showing through at the end. And I found that the dark base works a lot better than a bright base. It looks, if you have a bright base, sometimes it can look like you didn't finish your painting. So we're just going to go through and do this with all of our colors. All right, so now that we have all of our colors on there, we're going to take a dry brush and we're going to start to smear them along together. And I'm using kind of a plus across here every time as I'm smearing all my colors together to kind of combine that. And as you're seeing, it's kind of blending the colors as we go. You want to do this across the entire board. In my case, because I'm going to put a stencil over it, I'm not super concerned about if I miss something around the edges. But depending on what you're using it for, you do want to make sure that you get it all nice and kind of smushed together. Here, I kind of feel like I need a little bit more yellow. That was the very first color I put down, and it's kind of disappeared. So I'm adding just a tiny bit of yellow back in just to get a little bit more lightness on my board. So now that we have everything dried, our hot mess background is done. I'm actually going to apply my stencil now. My stencil is actually a chicken, which is hard to see in this video, with words cut out of the middle of it. To make it easy to center it, I'm actually not going to take the outside of the scraps of the stencil off until I have actually put it onto the board. So I have weeded out the center where it says fresh eggs. But then what I'm going to do from here is I'm going to put my transfer tape on top of it without weeding the outside. It's going to allow us to center it pretty much perfectly on the board without having a lot of work done to it. And you'll notice that my transfer tape is being reused. I tend to reuse transfer tape several times until it's not sticky anymore. There's no reason to throw it away if it comes off in one piece. So I'm just going to get this smoothed onto here pretty good, and then after that we'll go ahead and we'll add it onto the board itself to create our final project. So I'm having a little trouble here. I didn't quite smooth it down as much. I really focused on the chicken and making sure that was really adhered to the transfer tape, but I neglected to take into account that I've still got to get it to stick enough to get the transfer tape off of the vinyl. So this should do the trick. There it is. All right, so now I'm just gonna get this centered on. Because I left the excess and didn't weed the outside off, I've got basically the shape of my board, and I can go ahead and center it on my board really easily, not worry about my design as much. I apologize for my messy bun being in the middle of this, but this is one of those things that you pretty much have to be right over the top of it to get it on to the board and really get it just where you want it to be. So now that I've got it centered, I'm going to go ahead and really adhere the part of the stencil that's staying. You'll notice I'm working on those little details around my chicken, which you will be able to finally see in a minute. But I'm not focused on like the edges of this because I'm just going to peel that off. And I'm actually going to weed the outside part of my project as I pull my transfer tape off. So we'll just got to be careful around the little edges here. The cool thing too with this is it's taking off just a little bit of the paint, and it'll do that when I take off the final stencil. So it helps give it a little bit of a distressed look, which I really kind of like to my projects. You can start to see the chicken. You can start to see the back of it. Just need to make sure that I keep everything really well adhered. For my stencils, I know it's not as cheap as using contact paper or something like that. I go ahead and I use 651 Oracle just because it stays on the project and you don't have to worry about trying to seal it to make sure your paint doesn't get underneath it. And it really makes for a much nicer final project. It is a little stickier and a little tougher to pull off around because I am actually weeding as I pull off my transfer tape. It wasn't already weeded, so it does make that a little bit more challenging, but the end product is so worth it, and it just makes it a lot easier. You get a lot crisper lines, and you don't have to be as worried about your paint bleeding underneath of it, the stencil itself. So I'm just going to fight this for a minute here. Almost there. Don't want to rip off the head of the chicken here. We're almost there. Don't want to screw it up at the end. Yay! All right, so just make sure the little extra pieces, that foot was a little bit of an issue. Just got to get that fixed. And then we're going to be ready here to go ahead and paint and create the rest of our project. Just making sure that everything's down real nice and good around my letters, so nothing bleeds underneath there. But we're now ready to go ahead and paint over our stencil. So now we're all ready to start painting and finishing up our final project. So I'm going to use chalk paint. I like chalk paint a lot because because it is so dry, it doesn't tend to bleed. If you do have a section of your stencil that isn't perfectly down or anything like that, the odds of things happening or bleeding underneath is going to be significantly less. So if I can get my can open here, we'll get going. So even though chalk paint is really dry, it is important still to kind of wipe your brush out just a little bit so that you don't get too much on there. You can always go back and add more if you don't like how little is on your brush or ends up on your project, but it's hard to take it off. So I always start pretty light. I usually end up adding more, but again, it's easier to add. You can't really take it off. So I'm just going to go across here. Not real heavy. I want that hot mess to show through just a little bit. So I don't want it to be a completely white, like solid white. That's another reason that I'm using the chalk paint, is that it's easier to let things kind of seep through with that. And oh, as always, don't forget to finish your edges on your project. It's easy to be focused on the top of it and then realize when you're all done that you have this beautiful project and the edges aren't finished on it. So try and catch those. And when we start to get into the words, you notice I'm kind of going up and down a little bit more, just to take that extra precaution to hopefully keep it from bleeding underneath. But like I said, I've used the Oracle and it's down pretty good. And then adding in using the chalk paint is going to make it less likely that it's going to bleed. But that up and down motion over the words will also help as well. Now that our paint's dry, comes the best part of the whole project, revealing our results. So doing a little bit of peeling here. And I like that there's a little bit of paint sticking to the stencil. It's kind of helped given a little bit of distressed look to go with the chalk paint look, that it's a little distressed. So I'm going to pull out just a few more things. Got to get those centers of those letters. just a few of them. So not as big of a pain as some projects, pulling out those little tiny pieces. That. And then one more here, and then we've got to get that center of that E out of fresh. And we should be, oh, maybe, nope, there's more. All right, now we can get that E. I think that's everything. I really like how this turned out. I think it's going to look great on my wall. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. Have a wonderful day.